Welcome inside the parlor. Do you remember around this time last year when I was banging on about Aston Villa being a more ruthless organization in all aspects? Didn't these last two games on the field have that vibe to them somehow? And not to mention the off-field business. I mean, you're a high-potential Aston Villa youth player that's just about on the cusp of maybe getting into first-team action. Yeah, you're gone. Goodbye. And good luck in your future endeavors. We'll take the $40 million between the three of you. Let's talk about it. Hibernian 0, Aston Villa 5. Now, before we even get to the Hibernian match, confirmation that Aaron Ramsey is now a member of Burnley FC, and I'll be fascinated to know whether he's eligible for or will participate in the match at Turf Moor on Sunday. Following him out the door is his longtime teammate, Cameron Archer. We wondered whether he would be sticking around. Well, he's off to Sheffield United, supposedly, and Hull City is apparently about to snap up both Jadon Philogene-Bidace and Keenan Davis. Business worth £40 million. And these moves say an awful lot about our new Spanish footballing hierarchy. There is no room for sentimentality anymore at Aston Villa, and there is no time to watch fruit ripen on the vine. The time is now, and Unai Emery wants proven professionals because Villa wants to win today. I've read a lot of comments from people saying, well, if we're going to sell our top prospects from the academy, then what's the purpose of having an academy in the first place? And I think that's a major misconception. Gone are the days when the academy is there to exclusively try to stock the first team with a pipeline of talent. Those days are over. The academy is its own little industry. It's like a cottage industry over here. And since Sawiris and Edens have taken over, they have spent a lot of money on A, getting the raw materials in the first place, and then B, putting through the refinement and all the quality control measures so that when they come out of the assembly line, they have significantly appreciated in value. And when you add up Aaron Ramsey, Cameron Archer, Jadon Philogene-Bidace, Carney Chukwuemeka, even Jack Grealish, and you add all that together, I think there's validation that Aston Villa is onto something with its academy. There will be occasions when a very special talent is able to graduate from the youth system and into a Premier League setup, for example. But that is becoming increasingly rare. Gone are the days when Dean Smith, for example, would introduce Chukwuemeka and Jacob Ramsey at the end of the season in a game against Tottenham Hotspur where they were hanging on to win that game. And that was Dean Smith. God bless him. They're one of our own. Give them a chance. Show us what you can do, boys. And sure enough, they delivered. And of course, everybody thinks these guys are now first-team regulars. That is not the case anymore. Between Unai Emery and Monchi, the MO has always been the same. You have got to play a minimum number of games at the very highest level, or we can't trust you. And none of the names that I mentioned are in that position and won't be in a position, at least in the short term, for Aston Villa. You do get the feeling, hearing quotes and reading between the lines, that Unai Emery and Monchi are maybe not desperate to add to the squad before the window closes, but I see a squad that's thin, and we've just moved out 3 guys who were on the fringes, but they're 3 capable bodies. And with the windfall of money coming back, there must be wiggle room to be able to go and get the fullbacks and attacking players that we seem perpetually linked with. By the way, this is a big week for Monchi. This is the reason why we brought him in. In the past, it felt like Aston Villa was only too happy to be a nice dance partner and overpay even to get their guy. Monchi does not strike me as a charitable human being, and how he navigates this last week is going to be fascinating to watch because he has a lot of irons in the fire. He's linked with everybody. He's trying to create a market, but if we get to September 1st and we haven't added, That's a risk. On to the meat and potatoes of the Holy Trinity Show, the three key issues or moments that defined Hibs 0, Aston Villa 5, and there aren't many stats available for Europa Conference League games. All I got really was possession, which was 70-30 in favor of the visiting side, which is a really important aspect of how Unai Emery wants to approach these games and why so many of his clubs were able to navigate European competition. Oh, and you know who was watching this game and who watches this show, for which I'm extremely humbled? 92-year-old Villa fan Brian Prescott. Do you know Brian was a member of the RAF and he used to routinely go AWOL so he could sneak away and be with his girl, but only on weekends when Aston Villa was playing so that he can go see them at Villa Park. Very strategic, Brian. And what was even more incredible, Brian's girl was a blue nose. Thank you so much for watching, Brian. It means an awful lot to me. Up the mighty Villa. I'm sure you noticed that at times during that Everton game, especially late, we literally brought it to a standstill, to walking pace almost. And I know that drives some fans nuts. They think, well, this is boring. Why aren't we attacking? I know it's 4-0. Let's go for 5-0. But we don't get involved in those kinds of games if we don't have to, because there's simply too much chaos involved. And then we don't have control. Now, are we potentially a decent counterattacking team? I think we could be, and I think we're going to find out because we're not always going to have control of the football. Are we decent in transition? Again, I think we are built to be able to play that way. The fact that we can play all the ways is really important. And Unai Emery is a control freak, obsessive about details, and his team treasuring the football. And there's a really important, almost scientific reason for that. When you have the ball, you dictate the terms of the game. When you score first, you have even more control because now the opposition has to chase you down to try to get it back. And there's a saying in football, I've used it on this show before, but it's true. You rest in possession. When you don't have the ball, that's when you have to work to chase to try to get it back. And I would love to know the load data from this game, which is measured by GPS. You might have seen the unit on the sideline in front of Aston Villa's bench. Every single player's data is being measured. Sprints, pressures, distance covered, all of it. And I'm quite certain that this is how they determine substitutions. You'll notice on Sunday, Douglas Luiz came off early, and in this game, Boubacar Kamara came off early, which I believe comes down entirely to load management. And this is how we try to keep the squad fresh. And I would imagine that Villa's load was not necessarily stressed in these last two games. This is the science of load management in the modern game and why Unai Emery's approach is so effective. We had 70% of the ball at Hibs, which meant they had to do 70% of the work. They had to chase to try to get it back. They can't just stand there and watch us playing it around the back, keeping possession. They're losing. They have to do something. So both teams are playing this weekend. Hibs hosts Livingston on Saturday. We're at Burnley on Sunday. Which team would you rather be? I think we're going to be fresh as a daisy on Sunday, even though it's going to be a much more difficult test. We're also going to be in a bit of a rhythm, I feel. But when it comes time to the second leg, Unai Emery knows he can probably rotate that squad significantly, knowing that Hibs is not going to Villa Park and winning 6-0. Because he also has to factor in a visit to Liverpool the following Sunday. I'd also be really curious to know what the between-match routine is in these 3-game weeks. Like, when is the player recovery and how much time do they get? Do they still do a video debrief from the previous match? And then when do they do the video analysis and training preparation for the next opponent? As you know, video analysis is a huge aspect of Unai Emery's shtick. John McGinn was joking that he goes by the video analysis room and there's 10 guys breaking down video on Hibs' 2 previous matches. You know, I'm also very well chuffed that I successfully predicted that Lee Johnson would moan or whine or whinge about something over the coming week or so, and it only took the Hibs manager but 9 minutes to cry to the 4th official that Unai Emery had 1 inch of his very nice Italian shoes across the technical area white line. And so it filled me with delight and joy when the traveling Villa faithful, which clearly has an elephant memory like mine, when they sang, "What's the score, Lee Johnson? What's the score, Lee Johnson?" Oh, it was a beautiful moment. As was seeing this. Whoever did this, you're a very, very naughty boy. Minor-ish, but encouraging issue. Not sure if you've noticed, but Moussa Diaby and Leon Bailey seem to be rekindling their relationship from their Bayer Leverkusen days. They exchanged passes often, sometimes positions. Great goal by Leon Bailey, by the way, because he had to readjust his body in midair and contort to get behind the ball. That'll do a world of good for his confidence. I'm sure Moussa Diaby would love to score more goals, but when you play in the pocket in a controlled system like we were, you need to make some very intelligent decisions and not always think forward. And I'm impressed with how he's taken on that role. And I know that in a controlled game, he probably won't get as many chances. Let's see what happens when we don't have the ball as much and we're in a counterattacking or transitional game. That's when I think his pace will really show. Sort of like at Newcastle. It's a minor issue, but worth mentioning. How good was the refereeing performance of the Spaniard Ricardo de Burgos? You barely noticed the guy, and every single decision I felt he got spot on. And one thing I really liked is on the Ollie Watkins hat-trick goal, which was under review by VAR. He looks over to his assistant referee and gives him a thumbs up, like to say, "This is under review, you're probably going to get overruled, but I got you, we're teammates." You know, we could use more refereeing performances like that in the Premier League. Before I get to the top three, I wax on often about what 24/7 Services UK offers its customers. And yes, they do residential. Of course, they love residential. Who doesn't love residential? Redoing kitchens and bathrooms, all that beautification stuff. That's the fun stuff. But a core aspect of their business is also emergency services. Like, for example, two very unstable chimneys at Birkdale Station in Southport. So while you and I were sleeping, Paul's crew was sorting that out. And by the way, if there's one thing that Paul Handsaker obsesses over, like Unai Emery obsesses, it's a neat and tidy and buttoned up workspace when the job is done. So yes, they'll do your residential stuff happily, but they also provide emergency services, and I've put their numbers in the description of this video. Big issue or moment number 3, wonderful Watkins. In my last show, I asked, can you name another player that reminds you of John McGinn in any way? I can't think of any. Same can be said for Ollie Watkins with that running style of him. I once joked he reminded me of RoboCop with that very robotic, straight-up kind of gait. Somebody you would not want to be chased down by or have to chase. In fact, in the first half, do you remember he's running and there's a defender draped all over him and he's losing him and he's getting away from him? That wears defenders down. That's just the first part, though. Then he goes and he scores 3 very different kinds of goals, 2 with his head. And the reason why people always get on Ollie Watkins' case is because he misses the easiest of those chances, the wide open header. The first one I call a glancer, side of the head, bottom corner. We've seen him score that goal before. The next one, though, was a scooper. He gets under it and pushes it under the crossbar in very tight quarters, and he really had to read that moment, which he did beautifully. And then for the hat trick, he slots it easily. All told, Ollie Watkins has played 120 times for Aston Villa. He's scored 47 goals. That is a goal every 2.5 games. And yet there are still people in our fan base that think he's not good enough. I think he needs to have his contract extended and he needs a raise. And I would still bring in another bona fide goal poacher to either play with or instead of Watkins, because I think that'll push him further. In fact, if he's on the field with another poacher, maybe that'll give him more time and space to get opportunities. Great outing for him. Love it when the lad is smiling and having fun, because that's good for the club. Big issue or moment number 2, dominant Dean. On Sunday, he was delightful Dean. But on Wednesday, he absolutely pulverized Hibernian down the left flank. And we know that Luca Dean can pick the wings off a mosquito from 40 yards. Could sure use him around here for that right now. Poof! Another one. but we play narrow. So we know our fullbacks are going to have joy now and again in games. But on this occasion, Hibs simply could not cope, contain, control, you name it. He was allowed to fizz balls, shape balls, ping balls, drive balls, float balls. He gets 3 assists. And now, of course, what is Villa Nation saying? How the hell can we let this guy go? And the latest, straight out of the mouth of Unai Emery, is that he's actually closer to staying than he is leaving. But that he could still leave before the window's open. Isn't our fullback situation this year one of the weirdest sagas you can remember? It's going to be very interesting to see what happens when Alex Moreno is back fit and ready, because Unai Emery brought him in with this vision of exactly what he needed from that side of the field and that particular role. Moreno may be a little older, but he's arguably faster. And unlike Dean, who likes to pick passes, Moreno runs at defenders, which causes different kinds of problems. The biggest difference between the two of them really is wages. I guess the big question is, who's the better defender then? Because as Premier League wingers get better, that's going to challenge both of them, particularly Dean, who I don't think is the best of defenders. And in these last 2 games, he was playing on a yellow card. It's just odd that, here we have these 2 players, one of whom has been great in these last 2 games, and yet we're still linked with left backs. I feel like it's a coin toss to see where Luca Dean winds up on September 1st, but also part of me thinks that no matter what happens, we'll be okay. Like we have an abundance of riches. And the number one big issue or moment that defined Hibs 0, Aston Villa 5, disposition disparity. Oh, it must have been a lovely away day to travel to Scotland's capital, Edinburgh, especially during festival season. Do you know, my brother-in-law used to work and live there, and he said he absolutely loved it. And then to go to Easter Road and watch the home side get pumped 5 bagel without us basically breaking a sweat and virtually ending the tie, in all honesty. But the gulf in standards here, and now I'm starting to sound like that chief excuse maker Lee Johnson himself, the gulf in standards is so wide, and there are many ways to quantify or illustrate that, including that Aston Villa gets bombarded week after week by some of the best players in the world in the Premier League. Hibs is playing Livingston and Ross County, and with the greatest of respect to those clubs and the league as a whole, it is universes apart from the Premier League, and no fact or stat can quantify that chasm more than the respective market values of each club, according to Transfermarkt anyway. Hibs, £11.1 million. Aston Villa, £526.1 million. And the exciting thing for me is that we are actually starting to look like a £526 million club, because if we didn't, that'd be a big problem, especially when you consider in the last couple of games, we didn't even come out of first gear at times. So I'm trying to keep myself grounded and not get too carried away about Wednesday's performance and result, especially on the back of what happened on Sunday. And the Europa Conference League competition and opponents will get better, that's for sure. But I'm impressed with how we set our stall, the expectations we've created, also the level of respect and thoroughness in preparation for this opponent, and obviously how seriously we took this competition given the starting 11 that Unai Emery put out. And although the game at Villa Park will be stress-free and effectively the tie is over, that may also impact the occasion a little bit. I mean, I feel sorry for the Hibs fans. Imagine booking your trains, your hotels, your travel, all of that for a game at Villa Park that is virtually meaningless right now. And I certainly hope that our first European night at home isn't affected for the home fans either, because I could sort of see that being the case a little bit. Off we go to Turf Moor, Burnley for Sunday. I'm looking forward to this now. It's a stiff test, but as I mentioned on our last show, a very productive outing the last time Villa visited there. Goals by Danny Ings, Emi Buendia, and Ollie Watkins staked Villa to a 3-1 victory. Believe it or not, under Steven Gerrard, yes, he did win a road game game or two for Aston Villa. And at that point, it nearly condemned the then Sean Dyche-less Burnley to the championship. But what a turnaround since. In comes Vincent Kompany. He reinvigorates, reimagines, and revives Burnley to almost a record-breaking season. Well, they clinched promotion with 7 league games left on the schedule. Now, the dynamic I'm curious about is that you've got Villa coming off the back of 2 very impressive results, albeit against not the best sides, but there appears to be some rhythm building, whereas Burnley has had to sit around and wait for this game since their opening day loss to Manchester City at home, and that's because the Luton game in between had to be postponed. I'm really looking forward to this now, and it could cap off a really good week. Do you know, it's not the result, outcome, or even performance that has excited me about these last few days, or getting meaningful minutes under the belts of players that are integrating still, like Diego Carlos, Pau Torres, Moussa Diaby, Yuri Tielemans, even Robin Olsen made a contribution in that second half. What excites me is the manner and the process of it all, which is starting to resemble what we saw down the stretch last year, don't you think? And the word that keeps coming up is professional, and dare I say it, ruthless. Until post-Burnley, be well, be ruthless yourself, and as always, up the mighty Villa.